take me far away under the sycamore tree.
Welcome to Twin Peaks Unwrapped. I'm your host, Ben Durant, and beside me is...
Brian Kazaska. Hey, Ben, how's it going?
It's going pretty good. How about yourself?
You know, I am ready for another interview from our book, Twin Peaks Unwrapped, the book that you can get at bluerosemag.com today. And who do we have on today's show, Ben?
We have Ken Scherer. He was the chief operating officer of Lynch Frost Productions. So, I mean, he was kind of like, I don't think there's enough to talk about him. He really was involved with behind the scenes. He did things with helping with the marketing and really, it was really interesting. He's a really interesting guy, and he has a great perspective of the whole first and second season, and he was going to be involved with Fire Walk with Me. And yeah, it's just an interesting guy, and I'm so glad we got to talk to him.
Enjoy our interview with Ken Scherer.
Ken Scherer speaking.
Hey, Ken, this is Ben.
And Brian.
Hey, Ben, Brian, how are you?
Good. Is this good to talk about Twin Peaks?
I'm happy to talk about the original Twin Peaks series and anything I might have worked on.
I don't have any questions for the new series other than I was going to maybe just say how you mentioned something in the book, but it really isn't anything to do, like in the Reflections book, but it has nothing to do with the series, really. So I had no questions about the new series for you.
Okay, good. I'd be more comfortable talking about the history of it all rather than...
Definitely.
Although I will say that I was on record, and have been since the original series ended, saying the only way it should go forward was if both guys were attached.
Yes.
And so I was really pleased that both Mark and David worked on the series together.
And that was my question, because that was what I was basically saying. In the Brad Dukes Reflection, you basically said that, and you said the only way was if Mark and David would sit down at a restaurant. And sure enough, in August 2012, Mark and David sat at a restaurant and did that. So that was where I was going to go. And then I guess I was going to say, what is it about these two guys that make Twin Peaks work?
The hard thing about any creative process is there is no formula, and can't even then dissect the ingredients in many cases. And that's particularly true of... There are two very distinct different men in Mark and David. But Mark, his real genius is words and story. And David's real genius is images. And so when you put those two things together, you can have the potential of coming up with a Twin Peaks for sure. That's why the movie, in my humble opinion, Fire Walk with Me, was less successful and certainly, I think, less satisfying to a lot of people who really enjoyed the original series because it lacked the kind of discipline of storytelling that Mark brings to the screen. I'm not sure David would agree, but that's my opinion.
Well, he agrees enough that he saw the value of working with Mark again on the new series. So he saw something in Mark that yeah. So you started after season 1 of Twin Peaks. How did you get the role of chief operating officer for Lynch Frost Productions?
I was working at the American Film Institute. David had been a fellow there years before, and so he knew me a little bit, but not really. But I met Mark at a party, and Propaganda Films had produced the original pilot and the first abbreviated season, and David and Mark realized how much money they were paying them. And so Propaganda Films was really a hot young shop at those days, and they were doing music videos and some other things. And David had a lot of regard for them, and it was being run by two guys who had also been at AFI. So I think David had some knowledge of them as fellows at AFI. Yeah. But so David and Mark decided, well, if we're going to do this, let's create our own company. And I met Mark at a party and was introduced to him and told him my ambitions, and I wanted to get into producing. And so he said, well, you know, we got this thing going, and if we can make it work and get picked up for the second season, we're going to start our own company. Would you be interested? And, of course, the answer was immediately yes. And luckily for me, ABC picked it up. And so I got a call, and I met them at Russo and Frank's in Hollywood. And I don't know if either guy will remember this, but they were in a small booth, and when I joined them, and so we sat there for a while, and my ass fell asleep because I was only sitting on one cheek. The booth wasn't big enough for me to slide in. And so I said, hey, do you mind if we get a bigger booth? And I'll go facilitate this. So I went up to the maitre d' and I said, look, it's David Lynch, for Christ's sake. He needs a bigger table. And we got it. And David said, that's very impressive. So I think that's how I got the job. But it was really through Mark and my friendship with Mark. And David made it very clear he never wanted to see a lawyer. He never wanted to see an agent. I was to run interference for them, and that's the role that I tried to play.
And so, what does your role entail? Like, what do you do on a daily basis in that job?
Well, the other piece of it was that because of the incredible cult nature of it, there were opportunities for ancillary kind of income. So the first one was a publishing deal that David and Mark's agents had brought to us, and we produced 3 books. The Diary of Laura Palmer was a huge bestseller across the world. The guys made some decent money on that, and Jennifer made money on her writing, and so that was one thing that I oversighted for that. And then we put some merchandise into the field, T-shirts, cups, all kinds of good stuff. So that was part of what I was trying to do is drive some other revenue. I just wish social media had existed then. I brought a coffee deal into ABC, and it was a natural coffee, and it was turned down because I was told at the time by practices and standards at ABC that there would never, ever be product placement in a TV show. And then a few years later came Seinfeld, and that was the end of it. So we were a little bit ahead of our time. So some of the things we were trying to put in play didn't work because of all these restrictions in life. But we made some nice headway in marketing. And part of what I wanted to do was, we knew people were watching Twin Peaks collectively. And both in frat houses, college dorms, people's houses. And so I was trying to find a way, because when you get measured by Nielsen, it doesn't, in those days, it didn't track that. And so we were trying to prove to the network and everybody else that a lot of people were watching the show. And so we thought if we could do a big merchandising effort, A, would drive revenue, but more importantly, it would be another way to engage with our fans. And we could begin to show the result of that. So that was really primarily where I went every day in my head. And then just trying to help people who are producing the show make it possible, and negotiate with the networks and the promotional pieces of that, and all that kind of good stuff.
So in the merchandise, how did like the pitching process work? Did you pitch ideas? David pitch ideas? How does something like that come about?
We had put together an agreement. There are companies in the world that do this for a living, basing on the name of the company. I don't think they're in business anymore. So we had this, this company representing the show, and they had exclusive rights to take it out. They would take me into meetings, and we would pitch, and then we would bring the deals back to David. David and Mark, mostly David, had final approval on everything, especially from the creative perspective, because you can't, I don't care how creative you are, you can't replicate David's vision. It is a singular vision, and so I would bring it. And the only time I ever got myself in trouble with him was I had brought in a design for a T-shirt that he didn't like because it was too, what was the word he used? I'm not going to remember the word, but basically it was too commercial.
Yeah.
It was a Twin Peaks high school gym T-shirt. And so he said, I don't think that we should have that. And I said, okay. But he didn't tell me not to do it. And so the company, our promotion company, said, I'm telling you. So we put it in the marketplace. It was the leading seller of T-shirts.
Wow.
And he was in a store in Westwood and saw it, or someplace. He was someplace and he saw the T-shirt. And on Monday or whenever it was, I was yelled at.
Aww.
Until we were able to talk about the results. And then he just kind of left me alone. He never was happy about it, but he understood my intent was not to overrule his creative vision, but my intent was to try to promote this show and take care of him and Mark as the owners of the show, to give them as much return on their investment as possible. And that was solely my goal.
You know, the funny thing is, David Lynch now has like his own T-shirts that he sells on Amazon and stuff like that. So I think he sees the value of T-shirts. But
I'd like to think I was part of his evolution.
yeah.
Yes.
So something like the diary, did like David come to you and say, "Hey, I think my daughter could write this book"? I mean, I imagine it must came from him.
No, and that's where the genius of Mark becomes. Remember what I said. Mark is the storyteller. I mean, I think David and Mark talked a lot about these kinds of things. That was Mark's vision, and look, it was the obvious, right? I mean, you didn't have to be a genius to say, but it was Mark who thought, how do I get inside David's head so that the book has authenticity to what I know he and I have been talking about all these years. And Jennifer, who I haven't seen in years, but I loved and adored and spent an awful lot of time with, Jennifer was an exceptional person and is. I mean, because she was really smart and she had the mindset of her father and I thought brought that diary home in a way. And look, she knew the material, she knew the character, she knew the arcs that her father were going. And you know, very early on, and this was why I think if you want to talk about why the show didn't succeed in those days, is because Mark and David would say repeatedly, we don't know the ending. We don't know. We don't know who killed him. And we don't want to solve it. We really don't.
Wow.
We love the mystery of it all. And there was a very tense meeting at ABC where toward the end, where they kept saying, you have to solve it, you have to solve it. And, you know, it was not the story those two guys wanted to tell. So, you know, Jennifer got deep, she got dark. She and I have had some wonderful conversations, and the editor at the time, I think her name was Sally Peters, the publisher, was incredible to work with, and I remember flying with Jennifer out the day she was on Good Morning America to talk about the book when it was about to be released.
From Atlanta, Fulton County.
But one objective.
A book in and of itself, or is this a book that's going to be used in the second year of Twin Peaks?
Well, hopefully it will stand on its own as a book of a diary of a young girl who was troubled, to say the least, as well. But it does play an important part in next season and will be discovered.
So did your dad come to you and say, I want you to... Was there a script for the second season of the show from which you wrote this? Or did you sort of make this up and he said, I will weave some of this into the series?
Goodness, I was briefed beforehand, offered the position, accepted it, and then briefed, taken basically into a dark room, and David and Mark both looked at each other and said, well, I guess she needs to know. And I was told who the killer was.
You were?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, hold on, folks. You can guess what the next question's going to be.
Yeah, I can't tell you that.
What do you mean you can't tell me?
I can't tell you.
Nobody's listening.
That's. I know you're lying to me.
Well, everybody lies in the series. Why not do it here?
Hey, no, I'd be disowned in a matter of seconds, and I value my family life too much.
Well, I read a good part of this.
Right. Well,
I still have no idea who killed her.
Well, I will say that some of the clues in the diary will become more evident once the series begins again. Some of them stick out like sore thumbs, but the careful reader, I think, will find those clues that are more like gum wrappers under the table, things most might not notice. So Peaks fans, in my opinion, should know who the killer is.
Mark Frost had the idea for the diary. It all started with him.
Really, I think Mark's vision that both the diary, he was really excited about the Agent Cooper book that his brother Scott wrote, and that was a fun project. But you know, by then the show started teetering a bit in terms of rating, and then the tour guide, the guide to Twin Peaks, was all about Mark because he had met this guy in San Francisco. And I forget his name. He's long since passed.
Richard Saul Warman.
Yes, Richard. And Richard was the guy who was producing all of in those days, all the guidebooks to Paris, the guidebook to London, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And so he was a fan. He was a fan of the show, and somehow he and Mark connected. And he said, "Look, let's do a real guide to Twin Peaks." And that one was a lot of fun to do, and that was something I worked on. But it was really, again, toward the end of the run, and so it didn't have the heat and the traction that the diary had. But it was certainly fun to work on.
Yeah, I think it's kind of almost like a lost treasure, because
Yeah.
I think some people are still finding it to this day, that they're discovering this book, and I think it's really interesting. We did get to talk to Richard Saul Warman, and he talks about making the book, but then I talked to Harley Payton, and he says he's made the book. So I was just curious that from your perspective, the collaboration, who made this book?
Well, it certainly starts with Richard. You can't deny it. I mean, he had the template, he had the creativity, and he had the outside kind of. He wasn't wedded to it as much as Harley and Bob Engels, but Harley's right to an extent. We all sat in a room. Once we had the template and we knew kind of the book structure that Richard had helped us lay out, and the graphics and how it was going to look, and that was Richard's real drive with it at all. But as far as the content, you had to go back to the writers, because they were the ones writing the screen and the episodes. And so we would literally sit in a room, and this was why it was so much fun for me, because the rest of the time, creatively, I was not involved, nor should I have been. But this was the one creative piece where we all just said, look, we got to get this book done, and we know it's kind of at the end of the run, but let's have fun with it, because it will last beyond the show. And so we would sit in a room and just make some great shit up. Mm-hmm. And then people like Harley and Bob Engels and maybe Mark to some degree, and Scott Frost would kind of add pieces to it based on the character development and all that kind of stuff. My brother, who was not well at the time and something that passed very young, is profiled in the book because I wanted to do a tribute to him. Oh. So the photograph of Twin Peaks football team is a picture of my brother's team the year they won the state championship.
Wow.
That's cool.
That's so cool.
Yeah, and my dad passed away, so I did a little thing remembering him, the book. So for me, that book is very, very personal, and I loved it because I actually had something to do with it. And,
that's so cool.
It was genius. There was a genius idea that Richard had. There's no question.
That's something else. And I had heard, I think Richard said that the one contribution that David Lynch brought forward was, I think he took a picture of the Taxi Brother drivers or something like that.
In the pie.
Oh, no, was it the pie?
The pie on the cover.
Oh, the pie on the cover.
It was the pie on the cover.
Oh.
It was the pie. He loves that picture. There was no discussion about what the cover should be, ever.
I guess at one time there was going to be a calendar, a Twin Peaks Hallmark calendar. Do you know whatever happened? I thought they actually even printed the calendar out, but then it never got published.
Yeah, we did it, and I'd have to go back into my notes. I don't recall the circumstances as to why. I think I'm going to say there may have been some rights issues because of some of the photography we were going to use on it, and I think it got complicated, and it just was one of those items. It was a good idea, but the return wasn't worth all of the effort we were putting into it.
Yeah.
The big successes were certainly was the musical album that David and Angela Bennett. That was a huge seller. The book was a huge seller, and the T-shirts were fun. And we also did trading cards. I don't know if you've seen them.
Yes, Star Pick cards. Yeah.
Yeah, Star Pick cards. we managed to put them out of business. It was good. That was a cool idea because as a gift they gave me my own Star Pick card, so I have my own card that the guys designed for me. So, but what I was saying to you earlier, I think for me that I'd always heard as I was working at AFI and other places, and you hear it today, that you become a family and there's an environment, and boy, that was true of Twin Peaks. I mean, it was such a great place to go every day. People were just in it, and David and Mark had this sense of building a family. And with David, still to this day, he tries to work with all of the same people, And I see Kyle 2-3 times a year at various events, and it's always a warm hug and greeting, and we reminisce for a few minutes and then kind of move on. But that's the environment that David created, and Mark. It was fun. It was a really fun experience.
You guys are in this production company that you have, but then you also have to deal with ABC. How was that relationship?
I think the relationship was good in the beginning, but and this is the genius of Bob Iger. And when you see where his career has gone, you kind of get his genius. He was the one who saw this show. He really, really did. But unfortunately, those around him, who were kind of responsible for the day-to-day running of the network, didn't really believe in the show. And they didn't believe in the show because they didn't own it. And so David and Mark owned the show outright. And so they had no incentive to support this show. And they started moving us around on time slots and nights. We weren't getting the promotion we thought we deserved. I took a road show. I took the Log Lady and a few other people out on the road. And we would go to, there was a bar in D.C., which was one of my favorite nights. It was sold out, and it was the night that the show was on, so it was on the local screen, the TV there, and the Log Lady and a few other people were there to sign autographs. It was just a fun night. But ABC in the end gave up on the show because they had no vested interest.
Yeah.
And then by moving around, we started losing against Scherer. And I don't know what our share was when we ended the show, but right now it would be a huge hit. I know that.
Right. Mm-hmm. And so what were you doing to help save the show? I mean, I guess we're kind of getting into Coop stuff, but I didn't know if there was stuff before Coop that you guys were trying to do to save it.
I think it's, like I said earlier, it's all about trying to get as much promotion on our own without relying on the network. David went off and won the Pandora and got on the cover of Time magazine, which helped. In one way, it didn't help in the other way, in that it started focusing more on David and not the partnership between David and Mark. And that gets a little dicey in Hollywood when one of the creators begins to become more attached to the show than the other, and just the way life is sometimes. But so we tried. I mean, the merchandising. As I said, we did a road show. We tried to promote as much as we could. It was harder in those days because you didn't have all the tools that you have today.
So we had talked to Keith and Mike from Coop about the whole trying to save the show to maybe get another season or at least keep it going. And the way Keith tells it is he got a call from David Lynch and he didn't believe it was David Lynch and he thought he was putting him on. Were you involved at that time? Did you know that David was going to call Keith to tell him about Okay, yeah. So how'd you get involved with Coop? Like you actually did go to one of their parties, the return parties.
Yeah, I mean, I don't remember that as clearly, to be honest with you.
Totally.
But yeah, I think I'm not sure exactly what time frame that was. Part of what happened toward the end was I was going to be confronted with a choice to go with Mark or go with David. They were beginning to find their separate directions, which was fine. I mean. And so we had produced, 32, 33 episodes, whatever it was at that time. And so Mark had created a show for Fox that I love to this day called American Chronicles. It was really an incredible show. And the irony of the way the show got picked up by Fox was Barry Diller, who was running Fox at that time, said Twin Peaks should have been on my network. And he, by the way, he may have been right. I mean, I think if we were on a more upstart network like Fox, they might have been more patient with the show than ABC. So he bought this show called American Chronicles that Mark had designed, which was great basic concept, which is it was a 30-minute video show that if a Martian landed on Earth and had to report back what he or she was seeing, what would it be? What would it look like? And so they bought the concept, and the first one was Sturgis, North Dakota. I don't know if you're familiar with Sturgis, but it's a town of about 5,000 or 10,000. You can look this up. And every summer, it becomes a town of 50,000, and they're all bikers.
color I see. Then you maintain the status.
December.
A magic place, a holy place, the Black Hills, South Dakota, Wyoming. A place where native people have always come to cleanse their soul. In the old days, the warriors would ride their horses across the Great Plains and have a feeling of brotherhood, feel the wind in their face. Today it is done on the iron horse, and we, as native people, understand why they make this ride and what they're looking for.
And there had never been coverage of the festival, as it was known. And so Mark had read about it, was fascinated by, the dynamic of all this. And so we sent a film crew, and Richard Dreyfuss did the voiceover.
Baronian hit. Fashion Stonia.
For 50 years, motorcyclists from around the world have made an annual pilgrimage to the Black Hills of South Dakota. During this, the gathering's 50th anniversary, 300,000 bikers converged on a town with a population of under 5,000.
And again, it was like if you just landed on Earth and ran in, and you landed in Sturgis, North Dakota, what would you think of this? And how would you report it?
Yeah.
And it was brilliant. And it was done with music and video. The problem was that David, for whatever reasons, decided not to participate creatively. And so it had a more commercial look to it than he might have brought to it. And that began kind of a challenge for the guys creatively. And then Barry got upset because David was not, doing his thing. But so we did 12 episodes, some great episodes, and that went away. So I started focusing on that and thinking, well, what's my next move here? Because if this thing goes away, Lynch Frost might survive, might not. In the end, it didn't, but we did the movie. And so, I began to focus on that relationship and how we were going to fund it. And, things happened quickly in Hollywood, and it became clear that I needed to kind of start thinking about my next move, which turned out to be the unemployment line, but that's a whole other story.
Talking about American Chronicles, I think it was like ahead of its time. It was documentary style. It was, in some ways, it could be almost like reality TV today. But there's on YouTube, you can find some of them. I think the Mardi Gras episode is available there,
Yep.
and it was so well made. Like, I mean, the cinematography and Dreyfuss's voiceover, and just kind of being part of that world. I mean, almost you could see it on PBS or something too. But it was such well made, and I do think that maybe today it would have a home for people. I think people would really appreciate the concept.
I have begged Mark on numerous occasions when we run into each other, have lunch, or whatever we do, because I do stay in touch with him. I haven't seen David in years. I talked to him, actually. I called him to wish him luck on the new series when it launched. But I've begged Mark to go back there because you're absolutely right. It was ahead of its time. If you find it, I don't know if it's online, but we did an episode. It was the first time independent cameras were allowed at the Playboy Mansion in Beverly Hills. We had found out that Hugh Hefner was a big fan of Twin Peaks and had named his son Cooper.
Huh.
And so Cooper, by the way, is now running the company. He's that old, but and so we went and said we have this show called American Chronicles, and here's the concept, and Hef said great. And so it was an early episode, not sure which exact number, and it was only 15 minutes, and I think the other half of that half hour was George Foreman.
Oh.
We did a quick thing of George Foreman. But the Hef piece was so well received that Fox called and said this was the most reaction they'd ever gotten to anything they'd had on the air up to that point. And so Hef called, giving me one of my great days of my life, and invited me to come to the mansion to talk about a full documentary.
Wow.
Which we then eventually made. Mark and I, David wanted nothing to do with it. And it's out there somewhere. It's called Once Upon a Lifetime.
Huh.
That they own, Playboy owned. They gave us the I think it was $1.5 million to take the 15 minutes we had shot and add some new footage and turn it into a full hour and a half.
Our husbands and wives.
Daddy.
What? You get some.
Y otros en mi mejor. Reality or fantasy? Playboy's Playmate of the Year. For millions of Playboy readers, a fantasy. For Playboy's publisher, she became his reality. America's most famous bachelor became its most unexpected bridegroom.
You start working on Fire and Walk with Me, which was impressive that it was like the show gets canceled and right away it seems like Lynch is getting ready to work on the movie, and Kyle seems like he's involved, and then he says he's not involved, and you put out a press basically saying the movie is no longer going to happen because Kyle doesn't want to be involved. Can you share anything about that whole process of just trying to put the film together?
Yeah, I think that it was kind of what I was describing. So what you have are two distinct creators who have established this world. It would be like if Benioff and the other guy who did Game of Thrones, if they started arguing.
Yeah.
It's, these two men created this exceptionally incredible story called Twin Peaks, and now they were finding their creative juices going in different directions. It was never personal. Witness the fact that they were able to come back together, but it's just David is an artist, and so sometimes artists get bored and wants to do something. And when you have a partner that you have to kind of answer to creatively, who's not with you in the same kind of direction, it gets tense.
Yeah.
And so, and that started happening, and I think Kyle knew enough, because he's a smart guy, that a movie that didn't have both of them attached could be risky. And so, but I think David's friendship with Kyle was so incredibly tight and remains that way, that Kyle was able to be brought back in. And then we found the funding for it through a relationship David was developing on his own with the French company that had given him a big chunk of money to make 3 movies. They came in for the money. So, and then thanks to CAA and others, we were able to set it up with distribution from New Line, which seemed like a right partner. So I think people then say, well, maybe this is a kind of a way to say goodbye. I mean, the real hardship is when you have to end the show so abruptly.
Yeah.
And both creatively, where you didn't get to finish your story, but also back to the family idea. I mean, people were losing jobs and scrambling and all that kind of stuff. So you try to make up for some of that, and the movie was another way to kind of do that.
Before Mark Frost walked away, I've seen one article where he said he saw this is almost like a Star Trek franchise. Like, oh, we could keep on making movies of Twin Peaks, but I think his idea was continuing. He wanted to keep the story going, and it seems like David wanted to go backwards and go back to the prequel kind of thing.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think there was a wonderful concept which David would later exercise, but which was called Mulholland Drive, and that conversation began as what if we took her and put her out of Twin Peaks and she moves to Hollywood. So there were a lot of kind of, and that was kind of where Mark wanted to take it, was how do we extend exactly what you just said. But David was very, very protective of the concept, and so that's these are hard decisions that creative partners make all the time, some more successful than others.
And did you happen to be involved with the pilot? So I think David Lynch went back to ABC and they were going to make Mulholland Drive a pilot, or they did actually make a pilot, and then they passed on it.
Yeah, no, I think by then I had kind of transitioned. My focus really became, and then David also made a show called On the Air.
Yes.
ABC, which was not, I mean, it was an interesting idea, but it just was the wrong content for the wrong time.
Yeah.
I mean, And again, it lacked, Mark was not part of that, so it lacked kind of discipline of script that a TV half hour requires.
Right. And the funny thing, they seemed like they were involved. That they wrote the pilot together, so at least they started off working on it. And then, Mark stepped away from it, and I think it did lose some of its way without Mark.
Well, and Mark went off and made a movie.
Storyville.
Blanking on the name down.
Yeah, Storyville.
Storyville, New Orleans. Yeah. So I was commuting back and forth. I was going to Storyville down in New Orleans on production with Mark, and I was trying to keep David happy. And David once described me in a public meeting as the camp counselor.
Camp counselor?
Camp counselor, yeah. And I truly, toward the end, I really felt like I was the marriage counselor. But I have great admiration for both. As I said at the top of this, I was so happy for them that they came back together because they created, in the archive of film history, they created an incredible piece of work. And to be able to kind of, and maybe there's more, I don't know, but to be able to bring it back and have another iteration of it from a creative standpoint is really satisfying, and I'm happy for the two of them.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. I probably have one, I mean, that's just a great way to end it, just our conversation, but I guess I'll have maybe two more questions, that one of them being extremely geeky, so it's kind of like a bonus geeky question. But were you involved with the Twin Peaks Georgia coffee commercials I think they made for Japan?
No, David did that on his own.
Oh, okay.
David did that on his own. David, the great thing about David as a filmmaker, it's interesting, and if you watch his career since then, you can see it. He would sit in my office from time to time, not very often. I don't want to suggest that we were talking daily, but I mean, we did when there was business to talk about, but he wanted to make a blockbuster. I mean, his moment of satisfaction would have been to make, in those days, $100 million movie, you know?
Yeah.
And so, so on one spectrum, he also knew that to do that, he'd have to sell out commercially, and he just couldn't do it. Just couldn't do it. I mean, he had an experience with Elephant Man and some, but on the other hand, he loved making short films and commercials. And that was the propaganda influence, because they were doing music videos and commercials and other kinds of things. So he had a lot of people talking in his ear, doing, why don't you go do this? Why don't you go do that? And if the right opportunity presented itself, he would. Yeah. And that was one of the things that he did on his own.
So this is the bonus geeky question that I know you won't get, but you're like my last hope on this strange question here. So, and you said already in an email that 1-900 Twin Peaks Sheriff hotline you might not remember much about, but so this whole thing of the fans could call up this number and it would cost like $1 a minute up to $3, and they would get a message from Lucy and Andy, and then there'd be this strange man that would take over the conversations. Well, it happened to be the same week on the show, Lucy gets a phone call, and the person won't say who they are, and then she hangs up on them. And it's not in the script, so I always thought maybe it was almost like a secret product placement. Like, it was a way to, people would think about, why did Lucy get that phone call? And then, maybe I should try to use the sheriff hotline. Do you know anything about that, or do you remember anything about...
I just remembered it was one of a number of things we were trying to. Remember when I went a few minutes ago, I was talking about how we were trying to promote the show and engage the audience.
Yeah.
So I'd have to go back and because I haven't thought about this in a long time. But people were coming to us with all kinds of marketing ideas and So it was about that idea was how do we get the audience more engaged. And so that may have been something Mark did. I'm not sure. I'm really not sure.
Right. It's just
who else have you talked to?
We talked to Mark. I think did I bring it up to Mark?
You did.
I did bring it up to Mark, and I'm trying to think of who I would have asked.
Sabrina?
No, Sabrina wasn't involved then. I don't know who else. Maybe it was Harley. I probably asked Harley, and who I don't remember.
Harley didn't remember.
Harley didn't remember. Mark didn't remember. It's just such an obscure thing. But I remember thinking, boy, it's not in the script, and it just so happened. It's coincidence. The same week the hotline came out. It just seemed like a perfect kind of marriage or synergy.
Yeah.
And then when you were saying about wanting to maybe put product placement in there, it's like, this really could be Ken.
Yeah.
This could have been your.
I'll take credit.
Boy,
I don't look. As I said, the thing about that period of time, it was intense and very short. You know, there's so much happening. I'd be in the Balboa Boulevard studios by 8 in the morning and be driving home at 8 at night. And so, you know, I have great empathy for people who, you know, they have this sudden burst of success and you just become overwhelmed. I tell everyone my one day I'm working at the American Film Institute making $48,000, and literally 2 weeks later I'm being quoted in the New York Times about what did I think about the upcoming fall season.
Wow.
And I said to the interviewer, because it had been announced that I was now the COO of the Lynch Frost production, that was the only reason. And I said to him, 2 weeks ago I was making all of $48,000 working for the American Film Institute, and now you want to know my opinion on the fall season. America is a great place.
It is. It really is.
So, you know, we had a lot of shit going on, and I was just trying to field as much as I could. I think that's what it was. I really do.
Yeah.
I don't remember specifically, but we were looking for ways to engage the audience and to see what kind of traffic we'd even get on something like that. So
yeah.
I'm sure that's what it was.
That's something.
Yeah.
Well, Ken, it's been great talking with you. And like, we talked through email, and you said, "Oh, what else do I have to bring to the table?" But you brought so much insight and so much clarity to behind the scenes. So I thank you so much for your time.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thank you, Ken Scherer, for the interview. I mean, it was such a great interview to be able to talk with him and really talk about that behind the scenes of producing and creating Twin Peaks.
Yeah, and I mean, just another wonderful person, and getting these memories, getting these stories, you know, before people get too old, they forget them. It's like a nice time capsule.
I think I've already forgotten them. I'm also glad we have our book, Twin Peaks Unwrapped, the book that you can get at bluerosemag.com, because I do forget, I'm like, what are we talking about? Who are these people? And then you're able to open the book up. It's like, oh yeah, Ken and his marketing. And, you know, we could have had talking logs, or, we could have had all sorts of things. The possibilities were endless.
Right, totally. And if you have a comment, question, or thought yourself, give us an email at twinpeaksunwrapped@gmail.com. Follow us on Twitter at Twin Peaks Unwrapped. Like us on Facebook. And give us that 5-star review on iTunes. We're on Google Play. We're on Spotify. And with all that being said, Ben,
we'll be back soon. Thanks.